I'm Uri, CEO and co-founder of Shroud Lab. We're called Shroud because we route blocks and transactions. And today we'll talk a bit about this transition from CeFi to DeFi and what does it actually mean. So we've been hearing about DeFi and maybe you're already deep into DeFi, but some properties of DeFi we're just figuring out. I have a PhD in computer science, more specifically computer networks, and even more specifically, the blockchain network layer. So Shroud is kind of the crown jewel of my PhD dissertation. I found it with my then advisor, now co-founder, Professor Kuzmanovic. And the TLDR of what we do is routing blocks and transactions. And we'll talk about why does that matter today. Let's start with DeFi and the transition into it. Everybody are talking about DeFi. DeFi is getting very, very big. DeFi volume was $100 million in 2019, and it reached a volume of $1 trillion per year in 2021. But what does DeFi really mean, right? When we move and we take these traditional finance and centralized finance, like let's take exchanges and let's take like lending and borrowing and asset management and all of that, and we move that on chain into DeFi. What does that actually mean? And some properties of this are maybe obvious to you. Some of them are less obvious. And some of them, as I mentioned earlier, we're really just wrapping our heads around. So the easier ones are maybe that when we take like matching engines and back office, and instead of using them on an exchange, on a stock exchange or something like that, we have smart contracts on chains. Well, if you're into DeFi, that's nothing new to you. Even if you're not in DeFi, you've probably heard about smart contracts, right? These are just, instead of you working with the exchange, you interact with the blockchain. There is a smart contract, there is a program running on chain, and you can interact with it. Some other properties are, well, instead of having like order flows and price feeds, which we're very familiar with from traditional finance and centralized finance, all of a sudden you have transactions propagating around in a peer-to-peer network and the blocks propagating around. And again, we'll talk deeply more about that, but that's not super confusing or super complex. Okay, slightly different. You have these propagating, but kind of same thing. But one property of DeFi, which is very, very different, and I want to pay close attention to it today, is that DeFi changed the model that we're talking about. Instead of being point-to-point, we move to peer-to-peer. Right now, if you're a competitive actor on the traditional finance, then you need to be connected with Chicago, New York, London, Japan, Hong Kong, something like that, right? And that's enough. You need to co-locate, you need to be fast to interact with them, to hear from them, but that's that. But in DeFi, all of a sudden, you need to be connected to the entire network, actually multiple networks. Because critical information, and I'm intentionally vague when I say information, can come from anywhere, right? There could be a transaction selling, let's say, 10,000 ETH on Uniswap. Uniswap is the largest decentralized exchange out there. That transaction is coming from Australia. If you're a market maker, if you're a big trader, if you're anything substantial in DeFi, you want to see this transaction as soon as it's being created. Right, that's going to change prices. You're going to need to adjust your positions, not even in DeFi. Maybe you're a market maker on Coinbase or on Binance, but seeing that information ASAP is critical for you because it's going to change everything. Same for oracles, right? An oracle transaction saying, well, the price of ETH is now $2,900. You need to see that. That's going to affect everything in what you're doing. You have this internal price. What do you think the price of ETH is right now? And all this like data streams that you need to listen to are going to affect that and your position in the market. If a new block comes out on Ethereum, on, I don't know, BSC, on Polygon, etc., it's going to have new prices, new information, new state, and you need to see that ASAP. And there's no longer a way for you to co-locate, right? It's not like the CME, right? It's not like Chicago and New York and London, etc., that you can just connect to them. You're not connected to everybody else. You're going to hear about it from the peer-to-peer network, but it might take you quite a long time. And during this time, you're out of sync. that's not a very competitive position to be in when you're not exactly sure what's happening in the market. This is kind of like leads into what we're doing. Shroud is Flash Boys for DeFi. Okay, you can think of us as like your optic fiber cable connecting you with everybody else. We have a global network of servers that what we do is propagate transactions and propagate blocks extremely fast. Our average is like under 150 milliseconds, which basically means we're not at the speed of light, but we're not far off from the speed of light either. And so what we're doing for our customers mainly is to propagate transaction and blocks so they can be competitive in this DeFi market. We're routing $1.5 billion of trades each day. And what we're going to talk about speed, front running, and congestion in the network layer underneath blockchains. Why do you care about it? If you're just getting into DeFi or you're already in DeFi, why should you care about speed? Why speed matters? Like, of course, speed matters like in high principle, but actually, if you want to quantify it, how much does it matter? What does front running mean? What happens to your transactions when you participate in DeFi? How does congestion affect it?